Do you struggle with truly trusting God in difficult times? I mean, do you ever feel like, God, I'm afraid I'm going to need some answers to some of this stuff you got going on in your word or in my life because it's just not sitting well with me? Well, friends, you're in for one of the most authentic conversations I've had here on the podcast, which is saying a lot. You're also in for some spiritual yet practical ways to hurl those nagging doubts to the one who created your curiosity. And you're going to come away closer to Jesus than when you began. Episode number 114, it's such a breath of fresh air. So listen in. Do you desire to connect with God in real and tangible ways? Do you struggle with the reality that life hasn't gone the way you imagined it would? My friend, you are not alone, and you've come to the right place to grow in faith and live life to the fullest. I'm your host, Shelly Sneed, and it's my weekly mission to help you overcome obstacles that keep you from experiencing intimacy with God. Through authentic stories and experiences rooted in the truth of God's Word, hope and probably some humor are headed your way. Hello there, friends, and welcome back to the Unperfect Podcast. Today, I am here with Niki Hardy, and she is the author of Audie Award-nominated Breathe Again and 1 Minute Prayers for Women with Cancer. And her new book, which is what we're going to chat about today, God, Can We Chat?, is a daringly honest guide to growing closer to God one doubt at a time. It's just come out, and I'm so excited that we're going to be talking about this today. I've read it. It's an incredible book. It is so well written. It's engaging, and I think it's a rare book that combines spiritual truth and practical application, which is what I'm all about here. Mm-hmm. But a little bit more about Niki. Having left corporate life, she's been to seminary. She has moved continents. She's planted churches, started businesses and nonprofits, and navigated loss, cancer, church hurt, and painful uncertainty. But she firmly believes God loves a cheerful doubter. I love it. And she lives right up the road from me in North Carolina here with her husband, her ridiculous doodle, Charlie, who is the main reason their 3 grown kids come home. I love that. Well, welcome to Unperfect, Niki.
Oh, thank you, Shelley. It's great to be here.
I can totally relate to the kids coming home for the dog because I recently picked up my adult son and his wife from the airport, and I happened to bring our dog because he just loves riding in the car. And I mean, my daughter-in-law at least gave me a hug. My son was like, "Oh, this just made my day that you brought Rocket," and he went on and on about the dog. So they come home to see the dog and they come home for free food, but.
Exactly. Or call to see the dog. Now, I get,
that's right.
Oh, it's, my daughter. And her first words are, "Where is he? Can I see him?" I'm like, yes, oh, good grief.
Put the dog on the phone. Oh, it's crazy. But you know what? We'll take it. At least they're calling and coming, right?
Exactly.
Well, I do want to jump right in today because you've got so many amazing things to share with us. But I'd love for you to start off by just telling us a little bit about your story, because in spite of all those huge accomplishments that I just listed, the fact that you have written books about God's faithfulness when life falls apart lets me know that life has not been just a perfect rosy walk in the park. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your story that brought you to this point.
Well, I don't have to say much for everyone to know that I am not native to North Carolina. So I didn't actually come to faith until the first year that my husband and I were married. And I came to faith in an old Victorian church with bare brick walls, just minutes from Buckingham Palace. And it was really a point at which I just said yes to God. I was like, oh, yes, I'd like to be friends if you'd like to be friends with me. I'd always felt spiritual up mountains and believed in God and wasn't Muslim or Hindu or anything else, but I didn't have a living, breathing faith in that way. And I was Christian because I was English and, I was a nice person and I had gone to church a little bit as a kid. So came to faith in really this kind of dramatic way, in a way. I mean, that I suddenly was like, wow, yes. And then everything changed. I left corporate life and we both felt lead to leave leave our jobs, and we went into the mission field for a short time. And then I retrained as a teacher. Life just completely shifted. Eventually we went into ministry. That's what brought us to the States, where we felt called to plant a church in Charlotte, North Carolina. Our church in London was planting, and we were the leaders to do that, which does sound a little bonkers. We did have a few words with the Lord about that, kind of, because there's a pub on every corner in London and there's a church on every corner in Charlotte. So it was like, really? Were you sure? So that's what brought us over here. And it was while just the 2 years that we spent before coming here, we were in Oxford at seminary. And during that time, I lost my mum to cancer. And then once we'd moved here, about 8 years later, I lost my sister, Jo, to cancer. She was just 44. And then 6 weeks later, I was diagnosed.
Wow.
And Shelley, mine wasn't lung cancer like theirs. Mine, and, I can say this now, was rectal cancer.
Wow.
So it felt like the family heat-seeking missile of death had locked in on me, and quite honestly on my rear end. And so I had questioned God, and I had through that time. And I know you talk about living life to the full, but living the life that you've been dealt. Mm-hmm. And that really was the case for me, because what happened was I was like, well, the abundant full life that Jesus promised me, I've come that you might have life, and life in all its fullness, must be waiting off in the future when this is done, because right now I'm in the storms and the trouble that he said we'd have. And so I realized that was kind of theologically wrong, that they're not separated in time and space. But what I'd done was equate an abundant life with a Facebook fabulous life.
Right.
And it was like, Instagram, tell me who I really am, and so I had to rethink, well, what does the abundant life look like? And how can I live it when life falls apart? How can I thrive and not just survive? And so that's what my first book, Breathe Again, really was the story, bits of my story, bits of often forgotten women of the Bible story, and other people's story about, well, what does that practically look like? I'm one of these people that I love memoirs, but I really need the action steps at the end. I'm not very good at making that leap. I'm inspired, and I'm like, okay, I need to trust God. And then I'm like, how? I'm still mad at you. What does that look like? And so that's where I Breathe Again came out of. And then I was asked to write 1-minute prayers for women with cancer. So then fast forward, and we go through church upheaval, we go through other difficult things as a family. And of course, the world implodes with the pandemic, and not just the global suffering that entailed, but the division and the disunity, both within the church and God's people acting very unchristlike in many cases, and the lack of love. And then also the Bible was no longer my go-to strength, because I started reading it and thinking, well, hold on a minute, that story doesn't sit so well anymore. That looks like genocide, God. Right. And if I put a headline for today on that story, we'd all be horrified. And yet I've always said, well, it was, in God's purposes, in God's, arc of loving the world and, his people. And I'm like, actually, the Bible's not Bibling for me right now. And so everything God, faith, church, if you like, just started to not sit well with me anymore. And it frightened me, to be honest. My faith is precious. My relationship with God is precious. And I found myself one day, and I'd taken Charlie out for a walk, and I came back, and it was August, and, the underboob sweat was already happening at 6 a.m. and the deal. And I remember coming in, and my husband, Al, had worship music playing, and he was having his quiet time. And, I rolled my eyes with the emotional maturity of a tween. It was like, ugh, we've got so much going on, and he can still pray. And the words of Amazing Grace followed me upstairs as I went for a shower. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. And I remember stopping on the stairs and just thinking, no, that's no longer true for me. In fact, the opposite is truer. I once was found, but now I'm lost. And I didn't want to lose my faith. But if I looked down the path that led to faith, what I thought led to a strong faith, I was like, I don't know whether I can, A, sign up for some of those things, and B, do I want to necessarily relate and be a part of the group of people that are down there? Because I'd seen them acting in ways that I didn't think was particularly Christ-like, that would curl Jesus's toes. And so, but then I looked down the path that led down to doubt, and I was like, well, is that deconstructing? Is that what I'm doing? Am I going to deconvert? Am I going to lose my faith? And so I felt paralyzed at this crossroads. And so I just kind of metaphorically sat down and said, well, God, can we chat? Can we chat about this? I've looked to theology, I've looked to the word, and they are helpful, but I need to look up and talk to you about it. And so I did. And that's really where God, Can We Chat came out of, because what I realized was that our doubts do hold power, but not to destroy our faith. Like I had always thought, we're often, taught, not directly, but indirectly, that they can weaken our faith, but actually they're our faith's superpower, not its kryptonite. And so really that's my story of coming to faith and the ark and learning to chat with God about it all.
I love that. And my pastor says a lot, the opposite of faith isn't doubt, it's fear. And he says what you've said, that God loves an honest doubter. He says a cheerful doubter. But I can totally relate to that. And I know so many of my listeners can resonate with everything you just said, even if our situations and circumstances are different. But it is something I have learned to do too, to take, God can handle whatever I need to dish out at him. And, it doesn't take you long reading through the Psalms to realize a man after God's own heart was one who was constantly being honest with God. I think growing up, I don't know how this was with you, and you came to faith later, but for me, growing up in the church, I think I felt like I couldn't have any doubts because people would just quote scripture so quickly to ward a doubt, or the whole Romans 8:28 really fast, that God's going to work everything out, that I was supposed to just skip over that. And I didn't have permission to sit with the hard things, and that God wasn't willing to sit with me in that, which is what I'm learning now.
Yeah.
Just so powerful. So I'm curious, what do you think, or how do you think most Christians view their doubts? I just told you how I grew up thinking about mine. And what are we missing or believing that's not true about doubt?
Well, I think the first thing we think about doubt, and when I say doubt, I'm talking even our questions.
Sure.
The things we don't get. It's not necessarily a fundamental crack in our faith and our relationship with God, but all the things that we question, we feel disappointments and disillusioned and skeptical about things. I'm lumping all that in, if you like. And I think the first thing we believe is that they are a force that will lead us away from God, that will damage our faith, that it is the beginning of the end of our faith. And if we can reimagine them, reimagine our doubts as not the beginning of the end, but the end of the beginning, of something new, of something powerful that will lead us into this intimacy, it becomes actually something really exciting to lean into. So if we can reimagine it, then we have to reframe all those lies we believe around doubts. And, you just said you are in a church where your pastor even says, it's okay to doubt. I grew up spiritually in a church that was very open to questioning and talking about it. Yet still, I have these beliefs as, well, I'm the only one. I'm the only one who thinks these things.
Right.
Nobody else, especially not Julie, because she color codes her Bible. And, so-and-so whose faith always seems to be so strong. I believe things like, well, I can't tell God that. Oh my goodness.
Right.
Not that. I mean, that would just be the last straw if he really knew that. Or I can't tell God because he's God and I'm just this little old me down here. He is holy and, he might press his big smite button,
Right.
Or I need proof and certainty to be sure. In the book, I talk a lot about how, I'm quite a black and white thinker, scientist at heart. And it's this belief that, well, if I ask enough questions and dig in deep enough, I will come to the solution at some point.
Right.
I will figure it out. And that's just not true. So we have to reframe these lies that we believe around doubt. And then we're free to respond and reply to Jesus's invitation to come to him with our questions and, all who are weary and heavy laden. So first we reimagine them as a force for good, as our superpower, not its kryptonite. Then we reframe all these lies with the truth. And in the book, I go through each one of those lies and replace it with truth. And what I've done, which was quite fun to do, was to rewrite some of the biblical narratives through the first person of some of the characters, whether it's Thomas or Peter,
Yes.
Some of the characters that have wrestled in this way with these doubts. And so that was quite fun to bring it to life. And then I help people actually respond because I'm like, okay, well, what does that look like?
Right. And I love the way you did that because some of these stories we have read so many times. And I think we start to miss that these were human characters, that God was dealing with boneheaded people, stubborn people, people with doubts and questions just like us. So I love how you did that in the book. You touched on this a little bit, but you were talking about telling God everything, I can't tell God that. And something I tell my girls in Bible study all the time is he already knows what we're thinking. Like we are so known and so seen that just say it because he already sees it, there's that, we have to be authentic with him. We're wanting all of him and he's wanting all of us, even that stuff. And he created us with these minds that have questions. He created us with these personalities that are prone to lean certain ways. So I just love that we can bring our authentic selves to him with our doubts and questions. So you are no stranger to doubt yourself. You've talked about that some. You've talked about some of the loss that you've gone through. And one of the things you write in the book is that you felt like your faith was dying from 1,000 paper cuts, which is a very poignant line in the book. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit for us.
Well, I think for some people, we get to that point, maybe at the crossroads of doubt and faith, if you like, with one big catastrophic event, the loss of a child, or something that completely sideswipes us and makes us rethink everything, including our faith and the goodness of God and how could he allow these things. So, but for me, it felt slightly different. It was a slow decline, small thing after small thing after small thing after small thing that just started eroding my faith in a way that eventually I couldn't deny. And so I think no matter how you get to this place of questioning, of disillusionment and doubt and skepticism and just that uncomfortable place of everything that you once held true and was so precious now just not sitting so well. I think however you get to it, the solution, what God is calling us to do, which is to chat to him, is the same. So for me, it was by 1,000 paper cuts. For some people, it's one big, massive sideswipe. And that's awful as well.
Right. That's so true. And I can totally relate to that. I'm a glass half full girl. I was raised on faith. My parents just lived by faith and taught us to do the same thing. But in my adult life, it was like one crisis after another. And, the first 3 or 4, I was like, okay, we can do this. We can do this. And finally, by like crisis number 10, and when I say crisis, like kind of like you're saying, they're not huge, maybe life altering. Some of them were. But, you kind of get to this, okay.
Yeah.
I think no matter what your story is, we have these moments where I know some people call it a crisis of faith. And like you were saying, it's not, I don't believe in the existence of God. It's just, how am I reconciling the hard with the good of who he is, I think is what that ends up coming down to. So you've talked a little bit about this, how these different experiences have shaped your perspective on like really having authentic conversations with God. But do you want to share a little bit more about that? Because that's such a huge part of this story.
Yeah, well, I mean, you alluded to it, Shelley, with this, well, he knows anyway. And I think I knew that, but now I have a greater ability, a greater willingness, if you like, to sit in the unknown, to sit in the hard with God, and to say, God, can we chat? Can you pull up your celestial sofa and we have a cup of tea and we talk about this and what that actually looks like, and how do I team up with you and go into life with you, because I want to talk with you about it and, pray about it. But then I also have to live my life, and I want to do that with you more than for you. I want to do that with you without leaving you behind, because I need to park my faith and my relationship with you because it doesn't fit in this life that is difficult, or going in a direction that is tricky. And so for me, living in that mystery in the unknown with a God who is wonderfully knowable. I mean, it's amazing that we can hear God's voice and we can chat to him and know him and feel his comfort and his peace and know his ways. But ultimately, he's unknowable. We can't fathom his ways. We're not him, So it's living in that tension and keeping up the dialogue, keep chatting, to me is more important than having the answers.
Yeah.
I'd much rather have intimacy with God, which is what I think we're all after anyway.
Right.
That closeness, that relationship. I think that's what we're craving more than we're craving answers. I just think in our materialistic world where everything, is very tangible, I don't mean consumeristic world, although it is. I mean more, we're so used to things to being tangible that we think if I can know the answers, then that will bring me closer to God. And I think actually what brings us close to God is talking with God.
Right.
It's like if I have a friend called, Julie, and I say, oh, Shelley, you really should, you'd love Julie. And you're like, great, I'll read a book about her. I'll watch a TV series about her. I'll dig into everything that's ever been written about her. I'll talk to her. I'll pray to her, but I won't listen to her. Right. And I'm like, well, why don't you just have a cup of tea together? Sit down, go for a walk together. That's the difference to me.
Right.
We try and fill ourselves with head knowledge, thinking it will give us the heart connection that we're looking for.
Yes, or thinking it will make us more spiritual, which what makes us more spiritual is the Spirit, the Spirit of God. I was reading in my time in the Word this morning in 1 Corinthians 2, and it's interesting also having finished your book, and that's fresh in my mind too. But I was reading about where it says, that the things of God are spiritually discerned, and that's why those without the Spirit can't understand them. And then it says, but we have the mind of Christ. But I just, it led me to this point where I thought, okay, God, there are some things about you I'm never going to know. So I want to ask the right questions too. Like, what is it that you want me to know? part of me wants to have all these answers and to know everything and to have a neat little package boxed up. But the truth is, the intimacy part is where I find hope and healing and growth and deeper faith. It really is. That is more powerful than the knowing than the answers. So I love all of that. Okay, we're going to talk about my favorite part of the book, which is the acronym. I always say that wrong. CHAT, which is so clever. But I love this. I have printed out this little reminder to me of each one of the steps to just keep in my journal, because even the questions we might have that aren't in the book, even though you cover a lot, I was like, I just want to have this handy. This is so good for any question I ever have if I'm struggling. I love it. I love it. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how it helps us not just chat with God, but hear back from him what he wants to say in return?
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm always one of these people that's like, okay, I've got to chat with God. And I was like, okay, what does that look like? Right. Hi, God, I don't get this. And then you're like kind of stuck.
Right.
So I wanted to help all of us have a guided conversation with God that left room for us to be vulnerable with him and to actually hear what he has to say to us. And so being of a woman of menopausal brain fog, I was like, it's got to be really simple. So CHAT was the obvious kind of acronym to use. And it's the CHAT guided conversation with God is based on spiritual formation practices and spiritual direction, as well as CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, I'm neither a therapist or a spiritual director, but what I've done is gleaned from them to create a format that helps us get in touch with what's really going on with us and to listen and discern what God is saying. So the C of the CHAT is consider the facts. Consider the facts. So something has brought us to this point of asking the question to God. And in the book, I don't know, there are 15 to 20 different examples that I take you through. But as you have done, there's a blank template you can also use. But something normally brings us to this place of questioning. Maybe there's a young lady and she and her friend have both been struggling with infertility. They've both been praying. And now the other friend, is having a baby shower, right? And she's still trying. And so the facts are, both struggling with infertility, both prayed, and she's now pregnant. And so those are just the facts that brought us to this place. But then what we do is we honor the story we're telling ourselves. And so that's the H, honor the story. And this, Shelley, is really about what is the story that's going on in our heart that we are making an assumption about ourselves or about God. That's, I think, is the real nugget that God wants to minister into and speak into, less than the facts. So for this young woman, it might be, well, I prayed wrong. I was doing something wrong. I'm not spiritual enough. I didn't meet a certain standard of spirituality for God. Or maybe it's like, well, it's because I screwed up. It's because I slept around in college. That's what it was. Or he doesn't love me in the same way he loves her. There's some little nugget in all of our hearts. And often as I went through all these different questions, for me, that nugget was often the same in lots of different questions, because we have this similar deep wound in each of us. But if we can honor that and bring that to God in the third piece, which is the A, which is ask God what he has to say. So it's like, okay, God, with this belief, this story that I'm telling myself, what do you have to say to it? If you were to, say something to me over a cup of tea, or to write a letter to me, or we'd go on a walk, what would you want me to know or believe or understand or see about you and about me? What would you want me to know? And then we get to T, which is to team up with God ongoing. So what does it look like to take that new truth that we know about ourselves and about God, this new belief or this understanding or way of thinking about things. How do we take that into our everyday life, even in the situation where that friend might want to go to the baby shower, but she needs to go with God and love her friend while still holding the pain of what is happening in her life. So that's consider the facts, honor the story you're telling yourself, ask God what he has to say, and team up with God. And so that's what we do in our conversation with God. And I lead you through it time and time again with all sorts of different questions.
Yeah, and it's so powerful. Just the other day, I was struggling with a child that's not walking with the Lord, and got to the honor your story and realize, like, I know the story, like I know what I'm supposed to say. So when I started writing out, I was like, I can't believe I'm writing these things. I know better. But like, it was a space to go, this is actually, I'm feeling like I'm not as good of a mom as these moms and these moms, And so I'm writing down the things that I've told others they shouldn't struggle, Don't think that. That's not true. But just, I think sometimes we've been living a narrative so long, but we haven't honored it because our brains just went, well, I shouldn't be thinking that way, so I'm going to kind of ignore it and step across it. So it was an opportunity. I love how you said the word honor, and it's just amazing that it fit in the word chat, but that I can honor that this is what I'm telling myself, but then I can go and go, okay, God, now unpack this for me. What do you want to say to me? What's true? It's a beautiful way. It's kind of like a therapy session meets with God. A therapy session with God is what it feels like.
Yeah. And because what's crazy is that with that story that we tell ourselves, people like Brene Brown and other and neuroscience will tell us that we have so much stimulation in our brain, so much coming in, that when something happens, our brain wants peace and calm. It wants to return it to that state of rest and calm. And by creating a story, that is what kind of closes the loop on that. Well, what's going on? Why is this happening? I don't understand this. And I'm feeling, there's fear and shame and all sorts, guilt and all sorts of things, all the emotions in there. And so when our brain closes the loop, we get peace and calm. It's restored. Now it's closed with a story, but the crazy thing is that story doesn't need to be true. And that's the story that we keep coming back to, which is, I'm not a good enough mum.
Right.
Or I screwed up, or whatever it is. And I'm with you. I went through this with my spiritual director about our kids that are all on their own faith adventure. Let's just call it that. And we, in hindsight, we went through this kind of, well, what's happened? What's the story you're telling yourself? Ask God what he has to say. And really what he had to say to me in that moment was, can you offer yourself the grace that I am offering you? And what she got me to do was, she said, anytime, and she asked me, where are you feeling that shame and that fear that they'll never come back to the Lord? And I was like, it's in my gut. And I'm not a particularly kind of emotionally attuned person a lot of the time. I say I wouldn't know an emotion if it came up and introduced itself. but I was like, it's right here. She goes, okay. So when you start thinking about these things and start spiraling into that, they're not walking with the Lord, therefore I'm a bad, I'm a bad mom, put your hand on your belly and offer yourself the grace that God is giving you. And then you can walk into your day, you can team up with him. I mean, and I find myself in situations and I put my hand on my belly, on my tummy. And so that's an example of it working in real time.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's so powerful. And our brain just wants to close that loop, and it doesn't need to be true. So we need to go, here's some truth. God is gracious to me.
Yes. Oh, I love that. That's so powerful. Again, it requires that listening. I just read an amazing book by Ruth Haley Barton on solitude and silence.
Yeah.
Just practicing that. And that's been huge for me because I'm one of these people that just used to pray, read the Bible, pray again with my list. Amen. And I mean, it was decades before before it dawned on me, God may want to say something. Yeah. And I've just stolen the floor, which I tend to do in normal conversations as well. But
I think that's so true that we're tempted to rush away. Mm-hmm. Our default is to hurry on through things and not necessarily even to check our quiet time off the list, although that is something that we all are guilty of to a certain extent. But it's like I'm assuming that the only way I'll hear God's voice is through his word. And that is a major way he speaks to us. Sure. But when we sit in silence or we go on a walk without our phone or with it on silent, or we, are in silence and solitude for a bit, and we're journaling, but we're journaling as if it's God speaking. So when I journal and I pray my prayers to God, then I'll leave a little space, and then often I will start with my dear sweet child. It's what my grandfather used to call me. And so, and then I write as if it's God. And Shelley, 90% of it is me. Right. I know that I am not God, but he does use it to speak to me. And there are threads woven through in that I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have said that to myself. That must be God. Or it's a consistent theme that keeps coming up. And I was like, look at that. And so that's just another way to take time to listen to God. And again, we're using both sides of our brain. I love the whole neuroscience of it. Yeah. We are using our left brain to intentionally ask God to speak, and then at the end to weigh it up. But in the middle, we've got to quiet that logical, rational side that's like, that's not God. What are you talking about? And tune into that spiritual side, because it's spirit talking to spirit. He talks on a soul level. And so whatever helps you basically engage your right brain, music, art, painting, walking in the woods, journaling, whatever it is, put yourself in that way and in the way of that, and don't rush away. And that will help you hear God's voice. So anyone who's listening that's like, oh, I don't know how to hear God's voice, and is it me or is it God? Right. Give it a go. Give it a go.
I love that. That is so good. So good. I think we've already answered this next question that I was going to ask you, because this was talking about the difference between seeking certainty and then seeking the relationship with God. But did you have anything else you want to add to that?
I think the only thing I'd add is an encouragement to all of us, myself included, which is, again, a willingness to sit in that mystery and unknowing. For many of us, we just don't like it. No. We just don't like it. But actually, there is so much richness in it. We think it's going to be a dark night of the soul, but actually it's not. It's light and it's bright, and God's with us. And think about the curiosity of a child. I remember walking my little ones, down the street in London, and it would take us half an hour to go 3 houses as they picked up every leaf and wondered why it shone in the light the way it did. And look at that ant, and look, and if we can think of that place of mystery as a place of walking with God in curiosity, it's actually a really exciting place.
I love that. And you also just made me think of, because, our kids are grown now, but for the listeners who have young children too, I would say this is a great thing to not only work on yourself, but to work on instilling in your kids. You just had me thinking back as a mom. I think anytime my child asked me a question, I wanted to give them the answer. And if I didn't know it, I would look it up. I would ask my husband. I would ask the pastor. I would, to foster a sense of that is such a great question. Yeah. I don't know, but God does. And, just to foster a sense of curiosity that may never be filled with an answer, but the wonder of the curiosity. I think that's beautiful. Well, I'd love to ask you just a couple more questions. This last one would be, what encouragement would you give someone who is listening right now and they are just completely overwhelmed with these doubts, whether it's being hurt by the church, been hurt by other people, seeing things going on in the world that don't, or seeing things in scripture that don't seem to coincide with who God is, whatever it is that's got them at a place where they're just barely hanging on. What encouragement would you give them?
I think the first thing I'd say is you're not alone. It can feel like a terribly lonely place. And I would want to say you're not alone. You're not alone because there are lots of us. But you're also not alone because God's not leaving you just because you're feeling this way. God's not saying, well, come back to me when you've got it all figured out. He's like, I'm here. And that invitation where Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy but laden. And, I love the way Eugene Peterson puts it. He says, all you who are burnt out on religion, exhausted, walk with me, talk with me, learn the unforced rhythms of grace and learn to live lightly and freely. So I would encourage you, you're not alone because there's lots of us and there's more people than you think, but also because Jesus is saying, come on. Let's walk, let's talk, come with me. And so I would encourage you to say yes to that and to walk and talk with Jesus. And just, again, be willing to sit in the unknowing and be willing to have a generous view of your view of God, your view of scripture, your view of so many things. Because I think for me, I had thought, well, this is how everything should fit. If it doesn't fit in here, then it's either wrong or scary or something like that. And it's like, actually, no, it's so much broader. The boundaries are so much more fluid than I ever thought, and actually that is really comforting, whereas it used to be quite terrifying.
For sure. Such good encouragement for all of us. I love that he's a God who is willing to sit with us in our emotions. You talked about emotions and not knowing an emotion if it introduces itself to you. And I was the same way when I was doing therapy or in a confessional community. They'd say, oh, well, where are you feeling this in your body? And I'd be like, y'all are so weird. I don't feel anything. But, I never really stopped to take the time to sit in whatever I am feeling. But it's like that with God, to take the time to sit and know that he's in it with you. So I love this book. I'm going to encourage all of my listeners to go grab it because, as I said, I had left a review on Amazon. It's not just a book that you want to read one time. I feel like it's a resource that you want to have and hang on to. Tell us where my listeners can connect with you and find your book and all that good stuff.
Well, the book and everything, you can get the first 3 chapters for free if you want to kind of try before you buy, and everything like that, and all the templates and the resources that I give, whether it's a group study guide or there's a guide about hearing God's voice. All those things are at godcanwechat.com. And I'm at nikihardy.com. I hang out on Instagram. But I love, Shelley, that you said it's a resource, because what I'm hearing from people is that they are buying it for graduating seniors, kids going off to college, kids graduating college, in these milestones, and even saying to kids like yours, here's a book. I know, our young kids don't necessarily love reading, but there's an audio book. I narrate it, so the English accent is free of charge. But to say, look, I know you have questions and it's okay. Right. So it can be quite, I'm hearing that people are gifting it, which is such a lovely thought. But that's where you can find me. And I'm also on Substack, venturing into the Substack world a little bit. So, I will have to find you there. I've been on Substack for almost a year now and have really enjoyed
enjoyed the people I've met there and interacted with. So, well, thank you again so much for taking time to be with us on Unperfect.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been great to be here. Thanks for having me.
My friends, I know this episode not only spoke some life into you, but you probably know another friend who could really use this encouragement today. So go ahead, click on those 3 little dots by the episode and share it with her today. As always, I'm praying that you're able to see glimpses of God's glory in the now and the not yet of your unperfect life this week. I'll see you next time.